All the way from the start, I can feel it in my heart, like all the way from the start.
Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today I've got a new video where we're talking about 7 tips for mixing low end, getting better bass. Those of you who may be having trouble, kind of perceiving what's going on in your low end for your mixes, got some techniques and also some things to consider in terms of your monitoring, how to really strengthen and enhance what you're hearing down there, but also feeling, because this is just as much about feeling these days as it is being able to hear your low end. So let's go ahead and dive in.
I can never go to sleep. I hear them creep. Demons watching over me. They notice me. I know what they want from me. They want my soul. All this pain that's in my heart. Can't let it go. No, you gotta play.
First thing I want to talk about for mixing low end and getting better bass is to consider the importance of monitoring. You've got to be able to hear what is going on in your low end to mix it properly. You can't mix what you can't hear, right? So for some of you who are on, say 5-inch monitors, even 8-inch monitors, I have 8-inch monitors. Some of you are probably saying, well, the spec sheet on my monitors says that the frequency response goes down to, like 30 hertz or something like that, which you're thinking, oh, that's more than enough. That's low enough. I'll be able to hear it. The misleading part about this is on paper that may be the case, but once you bring monitors into a room, depending on the shape of the room, the acoustics of the room, whether or not you've treated your room, whether or not your monitors are ported versus sealed, this all affects the way that those frequencies and the frequency response is perceived to you and felt, which is very important as well with mixing low end. We're going to talk a lot about feeling because that's just as important as hearing with a lot of these really low frequencies. So there are some things that you can do to enhance your monitoring environment and give you a better portrayal if you are dealing with some shortcomings with your monitoring. So the first thing, at some point you may consider adding a subwoofer. And the sub is just extending the frequency response. So like we said, if you're having trouble perceiving what's going on, say below 50, that sub is just going to give you more of that feeling and more of the perspective of like a car stereo or a club environment. You all know what that sounds like and feels like. And so to have that extended low end with a sub, the perspective is just different. I would caution those of you who are eager to get a subwoofer because it can really be tricky to implement into a mixing environment that you're not used to or comfortable or know really well. And also you don't want to set the subwoofer in a way that it's going to be dominant. I like to turn the subwoofer to where it's just barely on, to where I'm getting the sensation, the feel of those lows, which is the way you want it to be in mixing. We're not trying to add a subwoofer to get this huge dominant booming bass in your environment, because that's just going to give you some inaccuracies in terms of how you're mixing. Another tip to enhance the monitoring of some of those really low frequencies is to use a pair of closed back headphones with extended low end frequency response. So that can be helpful in hearing a lot of those lower frequencies because, since we have the sealed environment against our head, it's going to kind of force those frequencies into our eardrum and give us a different perspective. So that can be much easier to kind of pick up on what those frequencies actually are. I would be careful with this because I find that it's a lot harder in this perspective to make judgments about actual level. So even though you can hear the frequencies easier in headphones, a lot of times it doesn't translate because the levels themselves, in terms of where you put the bass and the subs, can be misleading. So you're going to want to take it out. You're going to want to listen in other environments if you are relying on headphones primarily for mixing your bass. Next tip I have for you for mixing low end is to use a channel EQ across a lot of your tracks in your sessions, in the instrumentation, in the vocals, to get rid of some of the low end. So you'll see in this session, I have a lot of channel EQs that are just cutting off below, say 100 or so, just to keep things from getting muddy and murky. A big part of having good low end is making sure that the elements that are supposed to be occupying the low end are the only things that are filling that space. So a lot of times there's channels that you wouldn't even realize that would have bass in them, that over the span of an entire session, all this stuff collects and it just makes your bass muddy, can make your mixes murky, and also make all those elements that we talked about, like the sub, the 808, the kick, the things that we really want to dominate, it can make those less focused. So you want to make sure and just get rid of all of that low end information in elements that is not intended. Something to caution you all about is where you're making your low cut or your roll off. A lot of you are utilizing an EQ on your master bus or your stereo bus, and common practice, you hear it all the time, is to just stick an EQ on there and roll off, say below whatever frequency you've kind of been taught. And I'm just going to tell you, throughout the years, this has gotten lower and lower.
I can never go to sleep. I hear them creep. Demons watching over me. They notice me. I know what they want from me. They want my soul. All this pain that's in my heart, can't let it go. No, you gotta plant your seeds and let them grow. We would never bear some fruits, cause she's a. All this diamonds on my neck, it got me froze. Ain't what it's still wet, she's still a. You my guardian.
There's more of a preference to have this bass that you can feel. And so when we're talking about rolling everything below 40 off, or even 30 these days, I would not recommend this. It can result in a thin mix, even if maybe you're not picking up on it in your environment. I do roll off sometimes, things below 20, but it just depends on, how much stuff is kind of building up over there. You don't necessarily need to always use this roll off. It's more preventative if you see a lot collecting down there. Next tip is to utilize some bass enhancement plugins. So there's various plugins out here. Waves has a lot that create harmonics, which this is very important for those of you who maybe have bass lines that don't have a lot of really low sub content at 30 to 40, the stuff you can feel. This also can go in the other direction, where it's important nowadays to have bass lines that translate to laptops, to phones. Some of these don't actually play back bass that's above, say 200 hertz. So we need to generate some harmonic content so that people can at least perceive that the bass line is there, even though they can't necessarily hear it in the same way that they would on their speakers. Another useful way to pick up on what's going on in the low end is to use a frequency analyzer. I almost always have one on my master bus. Now, whether you're using a plugin, in my case, I use the TC Electronic Clarity M, and I have that up all the time, pretty much on the frequency analyzer for the most part. And I can just kind of scan through my low end frequencies and get not only a perspective of, where things are hitting, but also in terms of level, where certain frequencies may have some buildup. Maybe, again, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot going on below 20.
I can never go to sleep. I hear them creep. Demons watching over me. They notice me. I know what they want from me. They want my soul. All this pain that's in my heart, can't let it go. No, you gotta plant your seeds and let them grow. We would never bear some fruits, cause she's a. All this diamonds on my neck, it got me froze.
Next tip is to use stereo imaging to narrow the stereo field of your low end and your bass. So the way I do this is either utilizing the stereo imager in Ozone or something like Vitamin, whatever stereo imaging plugin I have on my master bus. I will typically just go and create a band that is from, say, 120 hertz and below, maybe 100, what a subwoofer would typically reproduce. And then I just want to go and I want to narrow that band and just take out a lot of the stereo information, if not all of it. We don't want to introduce phase issues. And also what this does is it focuses your low end. Things are going to hit harder, they're going to hit better, and you're going to ensure that you have that mono compatibility. All right, so the last tip I have for you for mixing low end and getting better bass is those of you who are on smaller monitors, you're having trouble picking up on the super low frequencies, try walking around your room. Usually, if you walk to the back corner of your room and just stand there, you're going to get some bass buildup and you're going to be able to perceive what's going on in the low end in a different way. Even if you don't have a subwoofer, getting away from sitting, straight in front of the monitors can be helpful with the bass. Low frequency sound waves, they travel in a different way, and sometimes you can't hear them until you're further away from where they're being produced. Also picking up on the way that, maybe certain furniture, your desk is vibrating. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but so little things like that you'll pick up over time can be really helpful in just walking around your room and being aware of the bass in the space, not directly in front of the monitors. All right, y'all, so those are my top tips for mixing low end and getting better bass. Understanding that a big part of it is monitoring. You can't mix what you can't hear. So you need to be able to enhance the frequency response of what you're hearing, feeling, and perceiving to be able to make educated and accurate mixing decisions. I'm not telling you need to go out and buy a new pair of monitors. I'm not saying you necessarily have to have a subwoofer. You can still utilize the tips we talked about. Also realize that mixing low end, a lot of it comes down to experience. You're going to learn and pick up on things about your specific monitors. You're going to pick up things about your room, about how you perceive and how you feel low end and bass, and take that into your mixing process. So I hope this helps. If you learned anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. We'll talk to you soon.